2009 was a big year for video games. There were loads of critically acclaimed releases such as Arkham Asylum, Modern Warfare 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Street Fighter 4, Flower. Seriously, Flower was kind of awesome. It was also something of a turning point for Sony's PlayStation 3, with a number of highly rated exclusives landing on the platform that year, like Uncharted 2 and Demon's Souls. Even with all these games releasing that year, Killzone 2 was still one of the most anticipated. Announced 4 years earlier at E3 with a ridiculous cinematic that was passed off as gameplay, so glad that's not a thing anymore, the hype for this game was palpable. When it finally launched in early 2009, it was met with near universal acclaim, with many praising its presentation, well-paced action, and excellent multiplayer. It's hard to believe, at least for me, that it came out 12 years ago. The first and only time I played it was back in 2009, and there was really nothing else like it. Sure, Call of Duty and Halo had been around for a number of years and the military shooter was already solidified as an industry juggernaut, but Killzone 2's grimy dystopian future managed to feel original and fresh. Even all these years later, I still remember being blown away by it, and the thought I had burning in the back of my mind as I sat down to replay it was, "Oh please God, let it hold up," followed shortly after with, "How the fuck did they pull this off?" And finally, "Why the hell haven't we seen a remaster?" So in this review, I want to talk about how well the game holds up today, why it was and is unique compared to other first-person shooters, what the best way to play it in 2021 is, why we haven't seen anything from the franchise in almost 10 years, and how a relatively inexperienced studio managed to go from this to this. Before we talk about the game itself, let's look at how Guerrilla was able to make such a monumental leap in quality from the first to the second game. The simple answer might seem like, well, the move to the more powerful PS3 just allowed them to do more. This is unquestionably true, but there's actually a couple of other major contributing factors. Firstly, the team who created the original Killzone weren't that experienced in game design. The PS2 game was for many of the developers not only the first game they worked on, but also the first job they ever had. This inexperience showed in the final product, which received mostly average review scores. On the positive side, sales were respectable, and eager to have their own Halo killer, Sony purchased the studio in 2005. This partnership not only provided a big injection of funds, but additionally it gave Guerrilla access to other first-party Sony developers like Insomniac Games and Naughty Dog to use as a resource. The exact budget for Killzone 2 is unknown, but according to reports from Dutch news outlets, it was more than the most expensive Dutch film ever made, which cost roughly 16 million euros or 20 million US. This makes Killzone 2 one of the most expensive Dutch multimedia projects ever. Guerrilla spent this cash wisely, investing in a larger, more experienced team, which helped them create a brand new engine specifically around the PS3's hardware. Cleverly labelled the Deferred Renderer engine, because of its use of deferred rendering, it focused on delivering cinematic experiences through a number of what were then advanced techniques. So, while the move from the PS2 to the PS3 did allow the team to increase the scope, it was the huge boost in resources combined with a much more knowledgeable team that resulted in the generational leap over the original, and in many respects, a generational leap over many of its contemporaries. There's a number of reasons why Killzone 2 stands out when compared to other FPS games released around the same time, but let's talk about the most obvious one first, the visuals. Clearly Killzone 2 is an impressive looking game. One of the reasons that it's still so visually striking is the sheer number of effects and systems working together in each scene, from dynamic lighting to the physics to the animations. These aren't just bells and whistles either, everything about Killzone 2 feels considered. Sure, it's easy enough to find rough edges such as low-res textures, it is more than 10 years old after all, but the way that the effects have been curated and layered shows a level of care that you don't often see in other games. Dynamic lighting wasn't super common in console games at the time, and Killzone 2 really flexes its technical prowess in this department. When you fire weapons for instance, the muzzle flash will shine light onto nearby surfaces and even cast shadows. This isn't just an impressive effect, sometimes you'll need to fire your gun just to see where you are. Killzone 2 was one of the first shooters to make extensive use of motion blur. This gives the action a cinematic quality to it, but it's also been used cleverly in a few instances. The train level, for example, uses motion blur to enhance the sense of speed. Unsurprisingly, the marketing centered heavily around the visuals. There was even an interactive version of the bullet time commercial that you could download from the PSN. This lets you mess around with the camera and playback speed, but it also lets you turn various effects layers on and off. This provides an interesting insight into how the game was built and also how sophisticated it was for the time. Of course, the visuals are just one component, and while they are impressive, what I think Killzone 2 does more successfully than many other games of its era, and even many modern games, is how it uses the presentation to create immersion. Immersion is a term that gets thrown around so much in the gaming industry these days that it has almost completely lost its meaning. But if there was a textbook example of a game that embodies that description, it's Killzone 2. In many games, immersion is often achieved through a combination of elements. This includes the visuals as well as in-game systems and mechanics, such as diegetic interfaces or something like the Nemesis system. Killzone 2 though manages to bring you into its world almost entirely through its presentation. It's not simply graphically impressive, it cleverly uses effects and hides the UI to present the visuals in a more filmic way. Many of these techniques are commonplace in the games we play today, and I think it's safe to assume that Killzone 2 played a significant role in influencing modern game design. Immersion is also achieved through the controls. Everything about the way you move and the way that weapons feel has a sense of weight to it. This really gives you the feeling that you exist in the world and have physical limitations. It's an interesting design choice that isn't often explored in the FPS space, and it's one of the defining characteristics of the game. Of course, the trade-off is that the controls aren't very responsive, at least not in the same way that, say, Modern Warfare 2's are. There are definitely no 360 no-scopes here. You can dial the sensitivity all the way up and it doesn't seem to make much difference. This dullness of the controls is further exacerbated by the frame rate. Killzone 2 targets 30 frames per second, but it dips frequently, and when you add the motion blur and other visual effects on top, and you consider that there's no auto-aim, it can be frustrating at times to find your target. Then there are the motion controls. To be honest, I think these could have been fun and enhanced the sense of immersion. Unfortunately, the real-life movements never match up well with what's happening on the screen. You could argue that the 6-axis is just not a great motion controller, but then again, Flower lets you play the entire game using motion controls and it works flawlessly. Seriously, go and play Flower. When your shots do land where you want them to, it's fantastic. In fact, even when you're not shooting at anything in particular, simply pinning the trigger results in a wonderful eruption of sparks and debris. The reason for this is Guerrilla's philosophy towards the gunplay. They called it the hit impact system, and it demands that every bullet fired must have an effect in the world. Basically, this means that every surface and object will react when shot, with some being able to be damaged or even completely destroyed. Not only does this look fucking amazing in action, but it can dramatically change the amount of cover and require you to alter your strategy. The hit impact system, when combined with the excellent sound design, makes all of the weapons feel brutal. Even the basic sidearm seems like it's taking massive chunks out of enemies. A couple more weapon variants for each faction would have been nice, as there aren't that many by today's standards, but there is a good mixture and they're introduced at just the right intervals to keep things interesting. Enemy animations further communicate the impact and violence that each weapon is capable of. They react to where you shoot them, crumpling to the ground, clutching their wounds, or screaming and twitching when you fire them with the arc rifle. Their behaviour isn't super advanced, but it's organic enough. They'll flank, aggressively push forward, and melee if they get close enough, and they hide behind cover and blind fire when pinned down. The way they react and scatter from a live grenade in particular is priceless. There are some other interesting background systems at play here too. The wind system can alter the trajectory of grenades and even influence player movement speed. So if the wind is at your back, you'll move faster, and if it's facing head-on, it'll slow you down. Collision detection is used on all objects in the environment, so even tiny little sparks will bounce off nearby surfaces realistically. These systems, both visual and background, all add up, making the experience seem unscripted, unpredictable, and ultimately realistic. Some of the game design and mechanics are a bit clunky though, particularly when looking at it through a modern lens. Performance, for instance, isn't great. I've already mentioned the frame rate, which is tolerable, but there's a bit of stuttering when a new section loads too. This is particularly bad on my PS3 because I replaced the optical drive a little while back and it struggles to read off the disc quickly. The cover system is a good idea in concept, but holy hell is it a pain to use. Regardless of which controller configuration you select, holding down 3 buttons and aiming at the same time is far from comfortable. Additionally, some levels can be frustrating because enemies will continuously respawn unless you push forward. I don't have an issue with this approach, but it's not always clear when you can stand your ground and when you need to go on the offensive. The last level is a perfect example of this. If you don't push forward, enemies will just keep piling in. Your squad will shout vague instructions at you in these sections to let you know that you need to push forward, but they're far from clear. Squad callouts in general is another area that isn't great. Take objective instructions for example. Your squad members often harass you to complete the objective. This is a nice in-game way of communicating to the player what they need to do, rather than using some kind of UI indicator. The problem is that this system isn't very intelligent, and squad members will constantly harass you if you go off task for too long. Not only does this discourage exploration, which is actively encouraged with hidden collectibles, but it sets up some wonky interactions as well. Like when a squad member calls out for you to revive them, but then immediately turns around and starts bitching at you for not pulling your weight.
Help me! Watch and learn, Sam. This is the easy way to open one of these babies.
Thankfully, these low points aren't major issues, and they're generally drowned out by the 10 other amazing things currently on the screen. Not least of which are the beautifully designed environments. Despite having a mostly grey and brown colour palette, level design is diverse, and all of them convey an epic sense of scale. Many of the designers who worked on the game came from traditional architectural and industrial design backgrounds. So buildings were designed from the inside out, and machinery was designed in a similar way to something that might actually be produced. This was an unconventional way of doing things for a video game, but it paid off with environments that are unique and unlike typical FPS arenas. Like many other systems in Killzone 2, the music is dynamic. This means that it reacts to what the player is doing and adapts. This system looks at a number of variables, such as where you are in the level, how many enemies you're fighting, and then it sets the appropriate level of intensity. This approach is very effective at framing the action with the correct tone, and the reason that it works so well is that Killzone 2 has one of the most incredible scores of any game I've played. It was recorded at the famous Abbey Road Studios with a full orchestra and choir. The orchestra included Maurice Murphy, a well-known principal trumpet player in one of his final commercial performances. You've probably never heard of him, but there's a good chance you've heard his work before. He had a very long career and was involved in loads of films, including the first 6 Star Wars films, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Alien, just to name a few. The icing on the cake is this phenomenal soundtrack is delivered as uncompressed 7.1 surround sound. Now, if you've been watching my reviews, you'll know that I repeatedly bang on about how you should be playing games with a surround system, or at the very least with a decent headset. Well, I'm going to do it again. If you haven't played this game using either of those options, then you haven't really played it. The pacing of the campaign is excellent. It moves along quickly, never lingering too long in the one place, and it always gives you something new to do or a new environment to explore. I haven't said much about the story up until this point because while the premise and backstory are interesting enough, the characters and dialogue quite frankly aren't. Killzone 2 was created at a point in time where video games were beginning to stretch their legs as a medium for adults. Unfortunately, many games chose to embrace this by including as many swears as possible, and Killzone 2 is no exception.
That's the fucking cowboy! Fuck! Shit! The shit!
Oh shit.
Shit! Whoa! Shit! Oh shit! What the fuck? God damn it! Oh, what the fuck is that? Fuck that. Fuck. The whole thing should be fucked. Kill fucking everything we see. Fucking Higgin, fucking Jen. Motherfucker!
It's a real blast from the past, and not at all in a good way. It's amusing at first, and although I am partial to the occasional expletive, it's hard to maintain interest in what's being said when 50% of it is fuck this and fuck that. And I say that as an Australian. Even so, I don't know that Killzone 2 needed much more story than it has. It's supposed to be a playable Hollywood action movie, and the plot is simply a mechanism to move you from one location to the next. Outside of the campaign, there isn't a whole lot to do. There once was a bustling online community, but that was shut down in 2018. I was lucky enough to play it back when the servers were still up, and I remember it being extremely sweaty. I think the lack of auto-aim probably scared off the casuals, and as a result, the people left playing were pretty hardcore. It played a lot more like a Battlefield than Call of Duty, with different class abilities and objective-based game modes. You can of course still play it offline by yourself against bots, but this is just a simulation of the real thing. There isn't any way to connect two PS3s together for some LAN action either, so honestly your best bet is to search YouTube for old gameplay clips to see what it was like. This is clearly the biggest disadvantage of playing the game in 2021, and a real shame. I don't know if I've played anything that would benefit more from a higher frame rate and better quality textures. This really begs the question as to why it has never been remastered or re-released in some capacity. I think I know why though. Killzone 2 was a big deal for Sony back in 2009. It was their premier first-party title that year, and a lot of pressure was on it to help boost the lagging PS3 hardware sales. They spent a ton of money both on its development and on the marketing, and critically it did well. But believe it or not, Killzone 2 wasn't a massive success. It sold between 1 to 2 million copies, which was probably enough to make a modest profit, but it was well below expectations and significantly lower than the 25 million that Modern Warfare 2 sold that year. There's undoubtedly still a fanbase for the franchise, but it's probably not significant enough to justify a remastering. Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't deserve one, like I would probably eat my own poop to get my hands on a 60 frames per second version, but from Sony's perspective, it's unlikely that it would make them a lot of money. When you factor in that Guerrilla started becoming tired of making Killzone games after Killzone 3, and have since moved on to the immensely more profitable Horizon franchise, it starts to become pretty clear why it hasn't happened. So in the absence of a remaster, what's the best way to play it in 2021? The only official way is on the PS3. Yeah, it's only 720p running at 30 frames per second, which has its issues, but it is still enjoyable, and for a lot of people it's the only way to play it. There is one other way though. On PC using an emulator like RPCS3, it's possible to run it at 60 frames per second at 4K and reduce or even remove the load stuttering. It's not perfect because it doesn't tidy up those gnarly textures, and you could argue that an ultra-sharp resolution goes against the original artistic vision. For this reason, I think playing it on the PS3 is the most authentic way to experience it. It's not perfect and it's starting to show its age, but playing it on the PS3 will give you a solid understanding of how ahead of its time it was. Killzone 2 is a flawed but entirely unique experience. The sequels are arguably more refined from a gameplay point of view and offer more variety, but in doing so they became more generic and lost the raw visceral impact that made this game so special. It's not the greatest FPS ever made, and it's definitely lost some of its graphical luster over the years, but it's still unlike any other first-person shooter and a truly unmissable title for anyone with a PS3. If you enjoyed this video, a like is always appreciated, and of course, a dislike will let me know that I need to improve. If you're new around here, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when new videos go live, and if you want to support the channel, head on over to the Patreon page. Otherwise, thanks for your time.